Kylie Winkworth is going to speak next. I think I've known Kylie since 1979, probably. Yeah, back in the old museum. Yeah. So I'm delighted that she's still here in the fight, former trustee and excellent strategist. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. So we thank you for your inspiring, we can do this together talk, because that's the spirit we need to recapture after 8 grinding years. I've got a PowerPoint with a bit of a recap of the last 8 years. Our cultural crime in 4 parts. Yes, we are. So this is where we are now. This is the shape of the government's evil scheme, shall we say. And there is so much at stake that will likely be decided in the next 6 months, and that's why this is crucial. Next slide. So we know where this started. The Confected campaign to pit a great public museum against the cultural needs of genuine and important cultural needs of Western Sydney, which we have always supported, and I have supported long before David Borges started talking about it. Next slide. The state infrastructure strategy, saying the powerhouse wasn't in a cultural precinct. Who knew? Next slide. Where are they now? We're on our 4th museum director since 2013. We've had 5 business cases, a failed fashion ball, 2 parliamentary inquiries, more than 12,000 signatures, I think it was, on the petition, millions of dollars in consultant fees, far exceeding the funds available to museums in regional New South Wales, stonewalling and dissembling by 3 premiers and 3 arts ministers, a secret development agenda to break up the Powerhouse Museum, evict the collections, strip the museum of assets endowed by previous generations, and turn the museum into a commercially focused contemporary arts centre. Next slide. The announcement of the site for the Parramatta, so-called Parramatta Powerhouse. Next slide. What were they? JP, I think this is one of your artworks. And we can laugh about this, but putting a museum on a high-risk flood zone is $1 billion piece of cultural infrastructure is utter madness. I still feel gravely concerned for the future operations of that development. Next slide. And here we see the riverine flood. I think since the announcement, the site's been underwater at least 6 times. And as we know, more extreme weather is becoming increasingly common. Next slide. The 2019 election, we had such hopes for Michael Daly. There's Gladys Berejiklian holding back the developers. Next slide. And in an Australian first, the Powerhouse Museum Alliance signed up as third-party campaigners to save the Powerhouse Museum and urge people to vote no for the Liberal government. Next slide. The design competition for the new Powerhouse Parramatta. Next slide. And the winner is, and we know the loser was Willow Grove, Parramatta's last remaining riverside villa. Next slide. And here was the Save Willow Grove's take on the design competition with the 2 milk crates. I pay tribute to our brilliant colleague Suzette Mead, who fought this courageous campaign all the way to the Supreme Court in a sad and unsuccessful appeal to save Willow Grove. Next slide. With a wonderful campaign of hearts and affection for that site. Next slide. With a really important central message, which is vital not just for Willow Grove and the future of Parramatta, but for Ultimo. I find it extraordinary that a museum could be wanting to build its infrastructure on the site of a much-loved heritage building when conservation is so central to the mission and purpose and very rationale of any museum. Next slide. and he was Kathy Wilcox's very good take. Next slide. Here were their dreams for what was left of the Powerhouse Museum if they were able to get away with it. The 70-storey super towers, the mooted lyric theatre, which may or may not still be on the agenda, the remnant cultural presence, creative industries, and fashion and design showcase in the shell of the Powerhouse Museum. That was their plan from 2018, and in one configuration or another, that is still the plan. Next slide. In the lead up to the closure of the Powerhouse, even the Daily Telegraph got on board about the closure of the museum and the fact that the Parramatta Museum can't display all the museum's collection, particularly the large transported. So there was a backflip. Who doesn't love a backflip? Next slide. And here was the odd couple together in the most excruciating media conference, which I recommend you watch on YouTube. And of course, I should have paid tribute to our other odd couple in this campaign, which is Robert Borsak, the chair of 2 museum inquiries into the Powerhouse, and his deputy David Shoebridge. Together they were just absolutely brilliant when you go back and read the transcripts. Next slide. Perrottet's promise. It's worth reading again and again to see how many promises embedded in this media release that gave us all such hope and comfort on the 4th of July 2020 that the Powerhouse was saved. How many broken promises are embedded in this media release? Next slide. Powerhouse was not saved. There was something evil lurking in the shadows. Next slide. And we should have paid more attention to what Linda Morris was writing, because a day later, she's revealing this long-existing scheme to turn the Powerhouse Museum into a creative industries precinct with fashion and design displays and repurpose the Harwood building for artists' workshops. It was all laid out there the day after the announcement that the Powerhouse was saved, and we just missed it because we so wanted it to be true that the museum was saved. Next slide. And this is the Harwood building, which is the source of our great anxiety. The museum's outstanding collection facility, conservation workshops, large object restoration workshops, exhibition preparation, research library, brains trust, and I think, as Andrew Grant often says, the beating heart of the Powerhouse Museum. This is what we're desperately worried is at risk, among other historic heritage buildings. Next slide. The Harwood building, historically tethered to the Powerhouse Museum, the whole reason the power station was built was to power the trams that were housed in the tram depot and that left every day to service the city from this site. It's a site that's so central to Sydney's transport and industrial history, and that's what's at risk, that we lose this, one of the last major industrial heritage sites in Sydney, but particularly in the city, that still speaks about its history and purpose. Next slide. The collection eviction program to the large object store at the museum's Discovery Centre at Castle Hill. This will be the last resting place for the large objects, the trains, planes and automobiles, which will never be seen together again. They'll be you can go and see the planes with the wings off, but this is the cemetery for the museum's collection. Next slide. The Treasures of New South Wales. In the purpose-designed Boiler Hall, the whole business case for the Powerhouse Museum was framed around this building, providing these exceptional, majestic, inspiring, conceptually resonant spaces for the display of the museum's internationally significant transport and engineering collection. And now, next slide. The demolition and collection eviction program is underway. It's absolutely tragic.
That is damage and dust from the demolition. The objects were not old. That's the Blériot. It should be cream for the left. There's angle grinders. air conditioning not covered, nothing covered. Total museological vandalism.
I couldn't say it better myself. Next slide. I'm just going to rush through these. Steam Revolution, one of Australia's great exhibitions of steam engines, many of them working under live steam. It includes the 1837 Maudsley beam engine, the earliest Providence steam engine known to have worked in Australia. It's an absolutely outstanding collection, and when you go to the museum on a weekend, this is one of the places that is absolutely buzzing with kids and families. Next slide. And here we are in With the New. We're after a different demographic now. Next slide. Jordan Gogos Fashion Parade, produced by the Powerhouse Museum at huge cost in May this year as part of Sydney Fashion Week. And here's the director's vision: ignore the weight of history, language and architecture. Out with the conservation mission. Next slide. Renewal is the same old PHM demolition program. Next slide. Concept EA, EIS now under assessment without any information about what facilities are in the design brief, the secret design brief. New entry mandated from the goods line, which will punch a hole either through the boiler hall or the turbine hall. Shops, cafes, 24-hour entertainment, maybe a theatre or a lyric theatre. Next slide. And what we'll lose is one of Australia's greatest museum foyers, atriums, the great public space that is so central to the whole concept of museum going, a public space for civilised conversations, for adventure and discovery. And we never appreciated the great gift of Lionel Glenn Innings' design of the Rand building and the huge barrel vaulted Galleria, which houses No. 1 Loco and the Bolton and Watt beam engine. Go and see those spaces before they go. Thanks. Next slide. Here's the concept plan. Shocking, just shocking. Next slide. Indicative, massing and proposed heights with the potential to obscure all the facades of the Powerhouse Museum, bar what can be glimpsed from William Henry Pier Street. Next slide. Gone will be this context, amenity and building relationships lost. I particularly love this relationship between the Seidler, Ian Thorpe-Poole and the Powerhouse Museum. Next slide. This was the summary of the Borsak Shoebridge Museum, last museum inquiry, or event centre, the museum, and that is what will be on the cards for what's left of the Powerhouse Museum. Next slide. What we can do, we can talk about this in the next session. Next slide. Saving the Powerhouse. Here are some of our key demands, again for further discussion. Next slide. ICOM, the new definition of a museum. And I love this statement: museums operate and communicate ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities. Now that's something that's been missing in this long, distressing saga. I'll leave it there. I've got a bit of a moan.